Good morning and welcome to day 4 of Art and Microbes in the Tacos Workshop. So we're going to start off today by looking at what we did yesterday. After that, we will look at some really weird experiments in cyanotypes and other types of photograms. People who are pushing the envelope, doing stuff that you probably shouldn't do, but is pretty cool and pretty interesting. Not all of it is stuff that we can do, but it's just something to think about and to look at and to enjoy. After that, we're going to do some more complicated exposures onto the cloths. You still have some of the white cloth available, I believe. Some of you might have run out of that by now and have moved on to the colored cloth. It works the same way, so you can do the same stuff with it. We're going to do double exposures, but instead of exposing both sides of the paper, the cloth, we're going to make 2 exposures onto one side of it to make a nice, more complex image out of it. But first, we're going to look at what we did yesterday. So pull up the 2 images right now. Here they are. So these guys are ready to go. This guy on the right was the first one that we did. It is, okay, it's not a great image. It could be better. Those details are a little chunky, and that's something that I talked about on that first day when I said maybe pine cones weren't the greatest idea. I ended up going with pine cones anyway because I thought the smaller textures of them would be nice, but they ended up just sort of looking like little, I don't know, little pellets of something. So not the most interesting. I also didn't arrange them very well. So that would be what I would say looking at that. I could have done a much more interesting arrangement, moved them around, done something different too. The other one, however, I really like. I think that's a great image. I really like it just as a single thing with it pushed all the way off to one side. That's really nice. You can pick an orientation with this. Now it's coming down from above towards me, or it's sort of crawling along the bottom of the ocean. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, which is sort of cool. But then this one has that added bonus of having a back to it. I turn it over and it's this really nice little texture of different shapes, different sticks here. So I think it works really well having both sides of this. They're very different and they work well together. So today we're going to do just one side of the first one, but you could do 2 sides. You could make 3 or 4 different exposures onto the same piece of cloth before you process it. As long as you're fairly quick and careful and you're not exposing it to too much sunlight, it will be fine. So that's something to think about. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing. You can try to make it a little more and a little more and a little more complex. You can add different elements together and do what you want. Part of what we're working towards will be tomorrow morning in day 5, the last day. We're going to look at everything that we've done, decide which is your absolute favorite, and then try to make the best version of that. So you can try out as much different random stuff as you can and try out and see what you like. So as I said, this one I think is very successful because of that off placement. And that's something to think about, pushing things off to the side in different ways. So we'll play around with that as we move on to the second one as well. It has lots of negative space. This is called negative space up here, where it's space where nothing's happening, but it can still give it a feeling, give a sense to the whole thing of largeness, and make this object feel even smaller than it is, things like that. So negative space can be used really nicely in an image. I could have just put this right in the middle, and then as I said before, it would be all about that microbe. It would be just about, hey, look at this cool microbe. But in this case, it's more, look at this microbe within a space. Look at this microbe taking up space and moving around within a larger image. All right, so we're gonna get ready to go outside and start making images. Pull together some larger microbes, I would say. Maybe 1 or 2, sorry, before we get ready to go outside, we're gonna look at a PowerPoint. Then we'll get ready to go outside. So stick around and we will look at some images right now. All right, today we're going to look at some more experiments with cyanotypes and photograms. These are people who are doing sort of strange things, things that maybe we can't do, but that you could use as an example, use as a jumping off point for some of your own experiments. So we'll start with a guy named Eric Williams Carroll. Eric Williams Carroll makes humongous cyanotypes of actually not photograms, but just of shadows. And we'll see a video in a moment showing how he does it. So if you look at all these images, these are really tall. You can see they're here. And what he's using is actually just really cheap blueprint paper. So this is the same paper that they would make building blueprints out of that I talked about a couple days ago, but he's using it to make his art out of. And so he makes these giant prints like this. So before we go on to that, let's give a real quick look at what it looks like. So coming back to this, this is a video of Eric working. So you see he's walking out, he's got this giant sheet of cyanotype paper under his arm, and it's all protected inside this little envelope that he made out of cardboard. And what he's here to photograph is the light there, the shade and the light from the trees. He's not doing anything more than that except exposing it to this light passing through leaves. Obviously, this would be really hard to do in Wyoming because it's rarely as not windy as that. But you probably could do something like this if you had a really nice light day. It helps that it's so large, so you can capture lots of stuff. And so right now you see he's opened it up. It's still not opened all the way. He's still figuring out how he wants to expose it. And then he'll open up 2 of the panels on one side, do that exposure, and open up 2 of the panels on the other side. So there you go. You see that slight yellowness to the paper? That sort of looks like your coated paper before it was exposed. And now he's going to make that image. So we don't really need to watch this whole thing, but we can go back to here. Okay. So he's one person doing sort of interesting things. Here's another guy named David Ondrick. Now this is a fascinating way to make cameraless photographs that you can't do. You will not be doing this, but I sort of wanted to show it to you because it's sort of cool. David Ondrick takes a microwave oven into his darkroom, and he puts DVDs inside the oven and then puts paper underneath that and starts it. And the DVDs burn because they got metal in them. And this is all incredibly toxic, incredibly dangerous. And he probably went through about 20 of these ovens while making this body of work. He was doing it in a dark room that had really good ventilation. That's the only way he could do it. But they're pretty cool. There are some things that are just a bad idea, but make for pretty interesting art. And these are these images here. Caleb Charland similarly did something that was sort of a bad idea, but it was sort of interesting. What you're looking at here is photo paper, cyanotype paper, or other types of photo paper that he has put into baths of microbes, different types of microbes. So we're combining here literally, as opposed to making an exposure of microbes, he's using microbes to make his art. What the microbes would do, he would pick ones that would eat his photo paper. And when they eat the photo paper, they would destroy it a little bit, but they would also emit heat or emit light or something else and expose the photo paper. So they do these really fascinating things. He doesn't have a lot of control over what it looks like, except choosing the correct microbe and the correct photo paper to make something interesting out of it. Christopher Colville, on the other hand, uses control in a different way. He lives down in New Mexico, and he goes out into the middle of the desert at night, sets out photo paper, cyanotype paper, normal photo paper, light sensitive photo paper, and he puts gunpowder on it, or he shoots it with guns, and the explosions and the heat and the light expose the paper in different ways, and then he processes it. So again, not something that we can do. Finally, Megan Riepenhoff does these beautiful large images, but entirely with cyanotype paper. She's taking big sheets of paper or little sheets of paper and dipping them into the ocean, and then pulling them out of the ocean, letting them sit in the light, and different chemicals hit them, salts and other things like that, and they just change color. And then she never processes them. She doesn't do that final step of sticking them in the water bath because it would wash away a lot of the stuff. Instead, she just sort of leaves them how they are and comes up with these gorgeous big images out of that. So in some ways, all of these are people taking a process and taking these materials that we have and doing things that aren't supposed to be done with them, breaking all the rules about them, and then trying to figure out how to make something interesting by breaking the rules. So this is an image of her making the images, either putting them onto snow or dipping them into the ocean in different ways. And finally, Leanne Langwell does an interesting thing. She uses photo paper, so a little bit different than the cyanotype paper we have. And then she uses either little cutout stencils or even a flashlight sometimes, and makes these gorgeous, gorgeous big images of microbes. of different types of small things, to microscopic organisms. And she's literalizing them. She's trying to illustrate them. So this sort of looks like what you might see if you look through a magnifying glass, but she's doing it entirely by hand, almost drawing, but drawing with photographic paper and making these beautiful, beautiful little images. So again, she's doing really similar to what we are, but with lots of control and at a huge, huge scale. So these are just different ways to think about the process. There's a lot of possibilities and a lot of ways to do it. All right, so now we're gonna start making some images. All right, for our first exposure today, we're gonna do a double exposure, but in a slightly different manner as before. We're going to combine the two elements that we've been working with, the microbes and the natural elements out in the garden. And we're going to combine them onto one single side of the paper. So essentially we're going to make two exposures. The first one, I'll put a bunch of microbes down and they're going to protect parts of the paper, parts of the cloth. Parts of the cloth will go blue, what sees the sunlight, and the rest of it will stay the natural color of the cloth. Then we'll pull off the microbes and we're going to spread grass all over it. The grass will not show up where the light hit the paper before, the cloth before, but it will only show up inside the microbes. So we'll get basically a stenciled out version. So for this you need a couple things that will take up large chunks of space, like the big microbes, and then a whole lot of little stuff that's sort of textured and has details. So for the first part, here we go. I'm going to put down my cloth. I'm using a colored cloth again, because as I said, I'm out of the white cloths. And I've got 3 fairly large microbes. I'm going to stick them along the edges like this. Nice little arrangement. And I'm going to get this down and start the clock. So as you see, these are going to cover up a good chunk of the cloth. And then the rest of it, the areas around them, will go dark blue. We'll remove them, put the grass all over everything. It doesn't really matter if it goes into the dark blue areas because those are already blue. They've already gone as far as they can go, so we can't put any texture in there. But the grass will texture the other areas, all right? So I'm gonna cut a bunch of grass and have that ready to go after 8 minutes of an exposure with this. I pulled it down to 8 a little bit because it is that double exposure. I don't want to have too much light coming through the black paper. So we're going to give this a shot. If it's a cloudy day, you maybe do a 15-minute exposure for this and then a 15-minute exposure for the grass afterwards. All right, so I'll come back when I'm ready to switch it out and we will check it out then. All right, so time's up. Now we're going to switch it out to the second half of this exposure. So I'm pulling this away. Pulling these off, you see we've got some nice texture, some nice images going on there. And then I'm just gonna spread this grass all over it. Nothing really complex or fancy about where I put it. I don't wanna make it a solid block, but I wanna make sure that it is at least gonna stick into all parts of the image. Then I take that, press it down, and then don't forget to grab these guys to make sure that they don't blow away. So what we're going to be looking at here, and let's grab it so that you can see it a little better. Yeah, the grass will cover up all parts of the image, and where the light goes through it, it will turn black or blue. And where it stops it, it will stay the natural color of the cloth. And so we should get this sort of textured feeling inside where the microbes are, sort of fleshing out the shape of the microbes, but not filling out the entire thing. And so let's see what that looks like. We're gonna give this another 8 minutes or so, just to give it a good exposure, but not a full exposure, and then we'll process it. All right, so this exposure's done. I had a little bit of issue with fogging from condensation coming up onto it. Hey, what do you think of this? So you put some, we're doing a double exposure now, so we're putting stuff inside the microbes. So we're gonna process this now. You could, instead of processing now, flip it over and do a very similar thing on the back side of it to make a double on the exposure on the other side, or just a single image on the other side. So you could do really whatever you want with it, but we're gonna process this one right now instead. So I'm pulling them off. You can see the fogging that happened to this, but you can also see the image. It looks fairly beautiful. So we're gonna carry this over to here, set this up, All right. And get it processed. So into the bucket it goes. And just to reiterate, go back, we talked about this on the first day, but if your parents have a little bottle of hydrogen peroxide around, it would be lovely to put a tiny bit of it, like a little squirt, into your water when you're processing. That will make it a little more intensely colored, the images. They'll have a little darker color, more contrast. But it will turn that way naturally over time, so it's not something that is necessary. All right, let's see what this looks like. All right, there we go. Exactly what I wanted. So, let's look at it together. What we've got are microbes, well, grass in the shape of microbes. You see how cleanly they fill out that shape? And you see how it's just pure dark tone all around it. Isn't that cool? All right? Very, very nicely done. So we can do different things. We could make each of these microbes be its own texture. And I think that's what we might do next. So we'll look at doing that. So I'll get something set up. I'm gonna pull a bunch of different small things like the grass, but other types of things. And then we'll do another thing where we use the textures inside the microbes to differentiate which is which. So we'll go from there. All right, I'm gonna turn this off and go collect some supplies, and then we'll come back and do another exposure. All right, so for our second exposure today, we're gonna make it a little more complicated again, all right? So unfortunately I've run out of the smaller cloth, so I'm gonna be using a larger cloth than what you guys will have. Pull that out now, which is gonna be a little problematic because my glass isn't big enough, but that's okay. We're gonna place these two down, and we're gonna go 3 microbes again, one of which is gonna be reaching off the paper. And we're gonna make this exposure. But then what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna go grab another glass in a little bit. What we're gonna do is have one of the microbes stay and have that be a standard exposure, and then fill the other 2 in with 2 different types of textures. We're gonna use these for one of them and the leaves for another, and see how that works. All right, so I'm gonna set the timer for 8 minutes and I'll be back. All right, so we're gonna leave that guy right there so he can be a solid toned image, and we're gonna pull these 2 and put textures where they were. So in order to do that, I'm gonna pick this guy up, just move it over there, and pull these 2 out. We're gonna take some of these leaves here and put the leaves into this area. And I gotta realize also that these are gonna put off liquid water, so I'm gonna have to come back and check them and pop it, maybe flip it over just to make sure that there's some there. Now, I'm gonna get this. These little spiky little guys. Ouch. This is done, I'm going to flip it over and do a really simple image on the back to contrast against this complex photo. Probably just a single microbe or a microbe and something else. Alright, so that's all good. Close this up, and we'll come back and check on that in a little bit to make sure it's still looking okay. Alright, so this exposure's done now, so I'm going to pull this, shake everything off, flip it over, and I'm going to use these 2 on the other side. Alright? It, flipping it over. I think I'm going to try to balance my composition by putting this guy in the middle and then have this little guy sneaking up on him from the side. And that is it. Just those 2, nothing else. Okay? Make sure that I salvage this guy and get it back in. And I'm going to make sure that this is going to be a nice direct sunlight the whole time. Alright, so this exposure is done. Pull this up. I'm going to make sure that that stays over it so that it doesn't blow away. Now we'll lock this guy down. Okay, and process this. See what it looks like. All right, so this is a green piece of cloth. Here's the simple side. And here's the complex side. It looks interesting. The leaves weren't perfect, but it could be worse. So, to give it a look, here we have. So this is the simple side of it, the second side. We just have one in the middle and one just peeking out of the edge. And then on this side, there's the one with the pine needles right there. Here's the one where the leaves are inside of it, and then there's the solid one. So it's a strange image, but I think it works. All right. So that's it for today. We are going to, let me see, hold on a sec. We're done with today. You still have some more cloth. Make sure that you have 2 cloths left for tomorrow, 2 of the color cloths, but you can use up the rest you want today if you want, or you can keep a couple more for tomorrow. We're gonna look at everything we've done first thing, and then pick a direction to go and pick something to try to get right, try to get perfect. So we'll be talking a little bit at the beginning, but then mostly it'll be you having time to experiment and try to make things work. As you see, we'll be getting more and more complicated with each image. It's sort of an iterative process where you try something simple and then keep adding more and more and more to it until you get to a much more complex image. So that's the plan. All right, see you tomorrow.